In 2005, that was the year that this all finally caught up with them. All these flaws were evident immediately. Through 30 games, the Yankees were 11-19 and 9 games out of first place. They had given up at least 6 runs in more than half of those games. Around then, they tried injecting some youth into the roster, bringing up Robinson Cano and Chien-Ming Wang, and then they rebounded, but as late as mid-June, they were still below 500. It was starting to look like maybe the run of Yankee dominance would end, that the 2004 ALCS might have marked an official changing of the guard in the American League East.
But midway through the season, they started to turn things around. Starting on July 2nd, they won 11 out of 13 games and climbed ever so briefly into first place. They hadn't really figured out their pitching or defense, but one thing they could do was hit. They were second in the league in runs scored, and they had above average hitters at every single position. The centerpiece of the lineup was Alex Rodriguez. 2004 had been a slightly down year for A-Rod. Even though he was the Yankees' best hitter that year, he wasn't quite the otherworldly self he'd been the previous seasons in Texas. But in 2005, he returned to form. He again led the league in home runs, runs scored, slugging percentage, OPS, and OPS+. According to Baseball Reference WAR, it was his best season since leaving Seattle.
It was another one of his arguably best season of his career seasons, right up there with 1996, 1998, 2000, 2002, and 2003.
A-Rod launches one deep to left. Everyone turns and watches. See ya! A monster home run by Alex Rodriguez as the Yankees go back-to-back. Here in the third, they lead 4-0.
Man, everybody's looking to see where that one landed. Chop that up into singles. You lead the league in hitting.
I don't actually think it was his best season, but it's probably his most underrated season, which I say because of how the MVP voting shook out that year. For most of 2005, the AL MVP contest was seen as a two-horse race between Alex Rodriguez and Boston's David Ortiz. And in the end, A-Rod got 16 first-place votes, while Ortiz got 11, giving A-Rod a pretty narrow victory. But when you look at the numbers, it's really hard to fathom how it was even that close. Rodriguez led Ortiz in practically every category. He had more hits, more home runs, a better batting average, a better on-base percentage, a higher slugging percentage, more total bases, more stolen bases, and more runs scored. The only really significant categories Ortiz led in were walks and RBIs. And crucially, Ortiz did not play any defense. Alex wasn't a Gold Glove third baseman, but he at least provided some value there, while Ortiz was a full-time designated hitter who only made 10 starts at first base in interleague games. To this day, nobody who was primarily a designated hitter has ever won an MVP award.
Unless you want to count Shohei Ohtani, but Ortiz didn't pitch as far as I remember.
Yeah. And this was actually the closest anyone's ever come to winning the award as a full-time DH, even though, again, Ortiz was behind A-Rod in almost every offensive category. So what the hell? What explains this close vote? Well, this was really a proxy fight over the value of clutch hitting, and the specter of the 2004 ALCS hung over the whole season. Alex Rodriguez may have gotten more hits, but Ortiz got the big hits, just like he had in the 2004 playoffs. He was a quote-unquote clutch player, which is why his team was the defending world champions and A-Rod's team had blown a 3-0 series lead. And look, the thing about clutchness debates is that you can always find evidence for whatever you want. There's no consistent definition of a clutch hit, so people's assessments of who was clutch rely on memory, which is famously fallible. People remember the clutch hits of guys they like, and they forget about the ones from guys they don't. And you can usually find numbers to back this up, but it's really statistical noise. So for example, in 2005, David Ortiz's performance in what Baseball Reference describes as high leverage situations was significantly better than A-Rod's. But then again, Alex was better in tie games. So does that mean if the game is 3-3, you want A-Rod up, but if it's 4-3, you want Ortiz up? No, of course not. It's just an illusion caused by random variance.
And no matter how much statistical evidence you point to saying that clutch hitters don't exist, most people will believe you. Fans, particularly the old-timers, or the bold-typers from Friar Joe Morgan, they want to believe that clutchness is an innate ability some players have that others just don't. There's an almost moral element to this idea. Nobody thinks the ability to hit a baseball is a sign of personal character, but the ability to hit a baseball in a clutch situation, that's a sign of mental toughness and fortitude, the mark of a truly great man.
Yeah, I want to say that we're not like shitting on the concept of a clutch hit. the idea of like clutch play is crucial to watching sports. And, James and I are both fans of that. We don't want to like take the joy out of anybody. And there was real joy for non-Yankee fans in watching David Ortiz be like a Yankee killer and play really well against the Yankees and get these big hits. What we object to is this moral quality, this idea that somehow clutchness is like an ability that you can cultivate in you, like an ethic or something. And I think that is the thing we really object to as bullshit. The way people use their feelings and biases and associations with A-Rod and Ortiz respectively to sort of unfairly draw this arbitrary line about who had this ability and who didn't, even though you could never consistently define it or find any real evidence of it.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that, like, in this dichotomy, both the old-timers and the stat heads are wrong and missing key points. Like, they're, like, clutch hitting is fucking cool and, like, makes baseball a fun thing to watch because baseball is not just a thing that generates spreadsheet stats. And conversely, the stat heads kind of point to things that the old-timers miss, and, like, there are ways of valuing and appreciating contributions that I think we miss in some of the conventional wisdoms. And I think this 2005 MVP race, while it wasn't quite as simple as the old timers versus the stat heads, because the old guys like Joe Morgan, they couldn't really get on board with giving the award to a designated hitter, but it did feel like a referendum on stats. A-Rod had the better stats, but David Ortiz had the better character. People just liked him more, and so he nearly won, even though he was not nearly as valuable.